The coffee had gone cold hours ago, but Dr. Amanda Rivers barely noticed as she stared at the strange patterns dancing across her screen. Deep in the Neptune monitoring station, surrounded by the hum of quantum processors and the distant whisper of solar winds, she had stumbled upon something that would change everything. The signal had arrived 3 days earlier, buried beneath layers of cosmic static and radiation from a dying star. Most technicians would have dismissed it as background noise, but Amanda specialized in finding meaning where others saw chaos. She had spent her entire career searching for signs of intelligent life among the stars, and now that life was calling out to her, the mathematical sequences were elegant in their desperation. Prime numbers arranged in patterns that screamed intelligence, followed by complex geometric forms that could only come from minds that understood the universe in ways humans were just beginning to grasp. But beneath the beauty lay something far more urgent. Countdown. Amanda worked through the night, her fingers flying across holographic interfaces as she peeled back layers of alien encryption. The translation protocols struggled with concepts that had no human equivalent, but slowly the meaning emerged. These beings called themselves Thalorians, and they were dying. Their world orbited a star humans knew as Proxima Centauri, close enough that their radio signals could reach Earth in just over 4 years. But this message had been sent using technology far beyond human understanding, folding space-time to deliver its plea across impossible distances in mere days. The energy requirements alone suggested a civilization in its final desperate moments. The decoded message painted a picture that chilled Amanda to her core. The Thalorians spoke of invaders from the void, beings who consumed worlds like locusts consume crops. These destroyers showed no mercy, no interest in communication or coexistence. They simply arrived, harvested everything of value, and moved on to the next target. The aliens called them the Ravager Collective, and their expansion pattern was methodical, terrifying, and heading directly toward Earth. Star charts included in the transmission showed dozens of dead systems, their planets stripped to bare rock, their populations vanished without trace. The Thalorians estimated humanity had perhaps 50 years before the wave of destruction reached the Sol system, but the most haunting part of the message came at its end. The Thalorians had detected human radio transmissions decades earlier, studying them with the curiosity of scholars discovering a new species. They spoke of hearing something in humanity's broadcasts that gave them hope, the sound of a species that fought not just for survival, but for ideals. "We have listened to your music and heard beauty," the translation read. "We have monitored your communications and found a people who argue passionately about right and wrong. Most species we have encountered think only of themselves when facing extinction. You alone seem to care about strangers you have never met. If any mercy exists in your hearts, if any strength remains in your souls, please help us. Our children are counting down their final hours." Amanda sat back in her chair, overwhelmed by the weight of what she had discovered. This was first contact, but not the joyous meeting humanity had imagined. This was a species reaching across the void in its final moments, placing its faith in strangers who might not even receive the message in time. She activated the emergency protocols immediately. Within minutes, encrypted transmissions were racing toward Earth, carrying the full contents of the alien message. The Neptune station's quantum communicators, designed for exactly this type of discovery, bypassed normal channels and sent the data directly to every major government and scientific institution on the planet. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Amanda's personal communicator exploded with incoming calls from world leaders, military commanders, and scientists whose names she recognized from textbooks. The Secretary General of the United Nations personally requested her presence at an emergency session, while the directors of NASA, ESA, and every other space agency demanded immediate briefings. But even as the politicians and generals began their debates, Amanda continued working on the signal. Hidden within the mathematical patterns were detailed technical specifications, star charts showing safe routes through collective territory, tactical assessments of enemy capabilities, and most importantly, evidence that the Thalorians were Not the first to fall, the collective had been expanding for centuries, leaving behind a trail of lifeless worlds and extinct civilizations. Each conquest made them stronger, their fleets growing with harvested resources and their knowledge expanding with absorbed technologies. They were not just invaders, but a plague that consumed everything in its path. Yet the Thylorians had noticed something that gave them hope. Recent collective conquests had taken longer than expected, met with fiercer resistance from species that should have been easily overwhelmed. Whispers spread through refugee communities hiding in asteroid fields and dead space. Something was changing in the galaxy, some new factor that the collective had not anticipated. That factor, the Thylorians believed, was the influence of humanity's radio broadcasts. Somehow, Earth's transmissions were reaching distant worlds, carrying with them concepts that resonated with oppressed populations. Ideas about freedom, dignity, and the right to exist without fear were spreading like wildfire through the collectives. Amanda realized the profound implications as she read the final sections of the message. Humanity was not just being asked to save one dying world. They were being invited to lead a galaxy-wide rebellion against an enemy that had never faced organized resistance. The Thylorians saw in Earth's people something that no other species possessed: the willingness to fight for strangers. The last decoded segment contained coordinates for a rendezvous point in deep space, along with technical specifications for faster-than-light communication relays. The Thylorians were offering humanity their most advanced technologies not as payment for rescue, but as tools for the war that must come. As dawn broke over Neptune's frozen horizon, Amanda finished her work and transmitted the complete translation. To Earth, she knew that within hours, every military force on the planet would be mobilizing for humanity's first interstellar war. The age of isolation was over, and Earth's children were about to learn that sometimes the greatest honor was to fight for people you had never met. The Thylorians' final words echoed in her mind as she watched the data packets disappear into the void. We place our faith in the warriors who sing lullabies to their young. News of the alien distress call spread across Earth like wildfire, igniting reactions that ranged from disbelief to outright panic. But within the halls of power, where presidents and prime ministers gathered in emergency sessions, a different emotion took hold. Cold, determined fury. Admiral Tom Bradley had been preparing for this moment his entire career, though he never imagined it would come as a rescue mission. The graying commander stood before the largest assembly of world leaders in human history, his weathered hands steady as he outlined humanity's response to the crisis. Behind him, holographic displays showed the mobilization already underway. Across every continent, the transformation of Earth's military was staggering in its scope and speed. Factories that had been producing civilian goods retooled overnight to manufacture starship components. The massive orbital shipyards above Luna worked around the clock, their assembly lines glowing with the heat of constant welding and construction. Humanity had been building toward this moment for decades without knowing it. Colonel Rick Turner supervised the training of ground forces at facilities hastily constructed in the Australian outback. His soldiers came from every nation on Earth, volunteers who had stepped forward when the call went out for humanity's first interstellar expedition. They trained in zero-gravity simulators, learned to operate in hostile atmospheres, and practiced tactics that no human army had ever needed before. The weapons they carried were unlike anything seen in previous wars. Plasma rifles that could burn through meter-thick armor plating, gravity hammers that could shatter concrete with concentrated gravitational fields, and powered suits that turned ordinary humans into walking tanks. Each piece of equipment represented decades of theoretical research. Suddenly given unlimited funding and absolute priority, Captain Maria Santos commanded the fast attack squadrons, her pilots drawn from the elite of every air force on the planet. They flew ships that had existed only as prototypes months earlier, sleek fighters capable of faster-than-light travel, equipped with quantum torpedoes that could tear holes in space-time itself. The learning curve was steep, but human adaptability was proving equal to the challenge. The fleet that assembled in Earth orbit was a testament to what humanity could accomplish when united by common purpose. The flagship vessels Terran Pride and New Horizon dwarfed anything previously constructed, their kilometer-long hulls bristling with weapon systems, reverse-engineered from decades of careful study of crashed meteorites and recovered alien artifacts. Around them swarmed hundreds of smaller ships, destroyers, cruisers, supply vessels, and medical frigates. But the most remarkable aspect of the mobilization was not the technology or the ships, it was the people. Every major religion on Earth declared the mission a holy war against evil itself. Scientists abandoned lucrative careers to volunteer for the expedition. Entire families volunteered together, unwilling to let others fight alone for the freedom of strangers. Dr. Rivers found herself at the center of a communications revolution as Earth's top linguists and computer scientists worked to establish contact with other species under collective rule. The Thylaurian transmission had included quantum communication, protocols that allowed near-instantaneous contact across galactic distances. Within weeks, Earth was receiving messages from dozens of survivor groups hiding throughout collective territory. Each new contact painted a grimmer picture of humanity's enemy. The collective did not simply conquer worlds. They transformed them into components of a vast machine designed for perpetual expansion. Entire planets were converted into shipyards, their populations enslaved to build the fleets that would destroy their neighbors. The few survivors who escaped spoke of horrors that defied human understanding, yet these same survivors also brought hope. They carried detailed intelligence about collective tactics, weakness in their defense networks, and most importantly, evidence that the enemy was not invincible. Recent conquests had faced unexpected resistance as species learned to fight back using strategies inspired by human military doctrine gleaned from intercepted broadcasts. The Thylaurians themselves had managed to hold out far longer than expected. By abandoning traditional military tactics in favor of guerrilla warfare, their survivors had learned to strike supply convoys, sabotage equipment, and disappear into asteroid fields before collective forces could respond. They were teaching these techniques to other species, spreading a new kind of warfare that the collective's rigid command structure could not adapt to quickly. Lieutenant Dave Park, serving as Admiral Bradley's tactical analyst, spent long hours studying collective battle patterns transmitted by refugee groups. What he discovered was both encouraging and terrifying. The enemy was indeed vulnerable to unpredictable tactics, but their response to unexpected resistance was to increase the brutality of their attacks. Worlds that fought back were not just conquered but utterly sterilized, their biospheres destroyed. As examples to others, the political implications were staggering. Earth was not just joining an existing conflict but potentially escalating it to levels of violence the galaxy had never seen. Some leaders questioned whether humanity had the right to make such a decision for the entire species. These doubts were answered by the arrival of new transmissions from Thylaurian survivors. The messages were heartbreaking in their simplicity. Children who had never seen sunlight sent drawings of their dreams. Parents shared stories of lives they had lived. Before the collective arrived, scientists transmitted final research papers documenting their world's unique biology, hoping that someone somewhere would remember their civilization existed. But the transmission that sealed humanity's commitment came from an elderly Thylaurian philosopher named Keth. His message was brief but profound. We do not ask you to die for us. We ask you to live for the principle that no being should face extinction alone. In fighting for us, you fight for the idea that the universe can be more than a place where the strong devour the weak. The final preparations took 3 months, every day measured against reports of collective forces drawing closer to the Thylaurian home system. Earth's fleet would travel at maximum faster-than-light velocity, pushing their untested drives to theoretical limits. The journey would take weeks, during which humanity would learn whether their technology could actually deliver them to the battlefield in time. Admiral Bradley addressed the combined fleet before departure, his words broadcast to every ship and transmitted back to Earth for posterity. He spoke of duty, honor, and the moment when a species must choose what it stands for. But his final words were simpler. We go not as conquerors but as liberators. We carry with us the hopes of every free being in the galaxy, and we will not let them down." As the great ships engaged their drives and disappeared into hyperspace, Earth fell silent for a moment. Humanity had committed itself to a war against an enemy that had conquered hundreds of worlds, armed only with courage, determination, and the unshakable belief that freedom was worth any sacrifice. Space itself seemed to hold its breath as Earth's fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Proxima system. What they found waiting for them defied every worst-case scenario their strategists had imagined. The collective had not simply conquered the Thylorian worlds. They had transformed them into something monstrous. Where Thylos Prime's second moon had once orbited, a massive ring of dark metal now pulsed with malevolent energy. The structure was easily the size of Earth's. Luna, its surface covered in industrial complexes that stretched beyond the horizon. Automated factories worked without pause, consuming raw materials and excreting warships like some mechanical parasite that fed on worlds. Themselves, Admiral Bradley studied the tactical displays with growing horror. Intelligence reports had prepared them for enemy defenses, but nothing had suggested the scale of what they now faced. Thousands of automated weapons platforms surrounded the ring structure, each one larger than Earth's biggest battleships. Energy readings indicated defensive systems, capable of sterilizing entire star systems. The Thylorian survivors had been accurate about one thing: the collective was not just an empire, but a machine that converted civilizations into components of its ever-expanding war apparatus. Every conquered species became fuel for the next conquest. Their technology absorbed and their population enslaved to serve purposes they could not comprehend. Captain Suntus received her attack orders with the calm professionalism that had made her Earth's premier fighter pilot. Her squadron would lead the initial assault, using speed and unpredictability to punch holes in the enemy's defensive grid. The tactics were borrowed from ancient naval warfare, fast ships hitting hard targets before disappearing into the void. The quantum torpedoes launched first, their exotic matter warheads creating cascade failures in the collective's energy distribution network. The weapons had been theoretical until months ago, but human engineers had a talent for turning impossible concepts into devastating reality. Each torpedo that struck home caused chain reactions that rippled through the enemy's power grid like lightning, but Earth's real advantage was not their technology. It was their creativity. While other species had fought the collective with honor and traditional military doctrine, humanity brought something entirely different to the battlefield: the willingness to fight dirty. Lieutenant Park activated the computer virus as the first wave of human ships engaged the enemy defenses. Hidden within seemingly routine communication protocols, the malicious code spread through the collective's network faster than their artificial intelligence could respond. Systems that had operated flawlessly for centuries began failing in ways their designers had never anticipated. The virus was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of trying to destroy the collective systems, it made them doubt their own sensor readings. Phantom targets appeared on tactical displays while real threats were ignored. Automated weapons platforms began firing on each other, convinced that their neighbors had been compromised by enemy infiltration. Colonel Turner launched his ground assault while the enemy fleet struggled with cascading system failures. His Marines had trained for this moment in simulators that pushed human endurance to its limits, but nothing could have prepared them for the reality of fighting inside an alien megastructure where gravity pointed in 3 directions at once. The powered armor performed flawlessly, turning ordinary humans into walking engines of destruction. Each suit weighed 3 tons but moved with the grace of a dancer, its occupant protected by energy shields that could deflect plasma cannon fire. The Marines moved through the station's corridors like avenging angels, their weapons designed not just to kill but to inspire terror in any survivor. The first collective troops they encountered were former Thylorians, their bodies modified with cybernetic implants that overrode their free will. The sight of their former allies transformed into mindless slaves filled the human soldiers with a cold fury that made them even more effective. These were not just enemy combatants but victims who deserved liberation through death. Overlord Krax commanded the ring station from a central control chamber that defied human understanding of architecture. The cybernetic entity had personally overseen 17 planetary conquests, each one adding to its collection of absorbed memories and stolen technologies. It had faced desperate resistance before, but never anything like this. The humans fought with a combination of tactical brilliance and savage determination that confused every model in the collective strategic database. They used weapons that should not exist, employed tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare, and seemed genuinely motivated by concern for beings they had never met. Krax's final transmission to the collective high command was intercepted by Earth forces and would later become famous throughout the galaxy. These creatures do not fight like any species we have catalogued. They show no concern for losses, no hesitation in using forbidden weapons, no respect for the natural order. They fight as if the survival of strangers matters more than their own lives. Request immediate reinforcements and authorization for planetary sterilization protocols. The battle raged for 18 hours before the ring station finally fell silent. Human casualties were lighter than expected, but the cost was still measured in thousands of good people who would never see Earth again. Their sacrifice had accomplished something unprecedented: the total destruction of a major collective facility and the liberation of nearly 1 million enslaved beings. The survivors they found in the station's processing centers were barely recognizable as the proud species that had sent the original distress call. Years of forced labor and cybernetic modification had reduced most to hollow shadows of their former selves. But in their eyes, the human rescuers saw something that made every loss worthwhile. Hope. Dr. Rivers worked tirelessly to establish communication with the liberated Thylorians, her translation protocols struggling with the trauma-induced changes in their language patterns. What she learned confirmed humanity's worst fears about their enemy. The collective was not content with simple conquest. They sought to transform the galaxy into a single vast machine with themselves as its controlling intelligence. The victory at the ring station was strategically significant but came with a terrible price. Humanity had announced its presence to the entire collective empire, and the enemy's response was swift and merciless. Long-range sensors detected massive fleet movements throughout their territory as resources were redirected toward the new threat. Admiral Bradley understood the implications immediately. Earth's fleet had won the first battle, but they had also escalated the conflict to a level that would determine the fate of every free species in the galaxy. The collective would not ignore this challenge, and their next assault would be designed to make humanity, an example for any other species, foolish enough to resist. But as he watched the liberated survivors being evacuated to human medical ships, the Admiral felt a satisfaction that transcended tactical concerns. For the first time in centuries, the collective had tasted defeat. Word of the victory would spread through their empire like wildfire, inspiring resistance movements and giving hope to the oppressed. Humanity had proven that the seemingly invincible could be beaten, and that knowledge would change everything. The war was far from over, but the first blood had been drawn, and it belonged to Earth. Word of humanity's victory at the ring station spread through the galaxy's underground networks faster than their fastest ships could travel. On worlds that had not heard free voices in generations, enslaved populations whispered stories of the Earth Devils who had shattered an entire collective fleet in a single battle. The oppressed began to dream of liberation for the first time in decades. Admiral Bradley established his forward command base in the ruins of the ring station, transforming the former slave processing center into humanity's first interstellar military outpost. The symbolism was intentional. Where the collective had once ground down captive spirits, Earth's forces now planned the liberation of entire worlds. The message was clear to anyone monitoring their communications. The intelligence gathered from captured collective data cores painted a picture that staggered even hardened military analysts. The enemy empire stretched across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy, encompassing hundreds of star systems and billions of enslaved beings. Their industrial capacity was beyond human comprehension, churning out warships and weapons at rates that made Earth's entire military production look like a cottage industry, but the data also revealed critical weaknesses. The collective's strength came from its rigid hierarchy and predictable tactics. Every fleet followed identical patterns, every conquest used the same methodical approach, and every occupied world was administered by the same inflexible bureaucracy. They had optimized their system for overwhelming technologically inferior opponents, but they had never faced an enemy that refused to follow the established rules of engagement. Dr. Rivers worked around the clock to establish communication with resistance movements throughout collective territory. The quantum communication relays provided by the Lorians allowed near-instantaneous contact across galactic distances, and the response to Earth's initial broadcasts was overwhelming. Dozens of species reported organized underground movements, all inspired by humanity's example. The Centaurians had been among the first to fall to the collective 50 years earlier, their peaceful federation crushed by overwhelming force before they could mount effective resistance. But survivors hiding in asteroid mining facilities had spent decades planning their revenge, waiting only for someone to prove that the collective could be beaten. Now they emerged from hiding, their improvised weapons and jury-rigged ships carrying hopes that had been buried for half a century. Captain Santos found herself leading increasingly daring raids deep into enemy territory. Her fast attack squadrons had evolved from conventional military units into something resembling space pirates, appearing without warning to strike supply convoys and rescue ships. The collective's artificial intelligence struggled to predict where the humans would attack next, their rigid programming unable to adapt to Earth's chaotic tactical approach. The breakthrough that changed everything came when Colonel Turner's forces liberated the prison world designated as Terminus Gate. The planet had once been home to a thriving civilization of aquatic beings, but the collective had drained its oceans to fuel their industrial processes. What remained was a barren wasteland where the Empire's most dangerous prisoners were held. In underground complexes, among the survivors was Chief Engineer Blix of the Centauran Republic, whose people had been among the collective's earliest victims. Blix had spent 30 years in captivity, forced to maintain the very machines that enslaved his people. But he had used that time wisely, memorizing every detail of collective technology and planning for the day when someone would finally challenge their rule. The information Blix provided was invaluable: detailed schematics of enemy ships, locations of critical manufacturing centers, and most importantly, the coordinates of the collective's central command facility. The Nexus was a space station the size of a small moon, located at the gravitational center of their empire. It served as both their primary manufacturing hub and the physical housing for the artificial intelligence that coordinated their expansion. "Destroy the Nexus," Blix explained to the assembled human commanders, his translated words carrying decades of suppressed rage, "and you cut the head from the serpent." The collective strength comes from perfect coordination between their fleets. Take away their central command, and they become nothing more than scattered groups of ships without purpose or direction. The tactical challenge was staggering. The Nexus was protected by the largest concentration of military force in the galaxy, surrounded by defensive platforms that could sterilize entire star systems. Approaching it would require fighting through layers of automated defenses, mobile fleets, and weapon systems that had never been tested in battle, because no enemy had ever gotten close enough to threaten them, but human military doctrine had always embraced impossible challenges. Earth's greatest victories throughout history had come from refusing to accept defeat even when facing overwhelming odds. The liberation of the galaxy would require the largest military operation humanity had ever attempted, and failure would mean not just the destruction of Earth's expeditionary force but the end of hope for every enslaved species. Admiral Bradley called for reinforcements from Earth, requesting every available ship and volunteer. The response exceeded his most optimistic projections. Entire national fleets volunteered for the mission, civilian ships were retrofitted for combat, and retired military personnel emerged from comfortable retirements to serve one final time. Humanity was committing everything to this single decisive battle. The allied fleet that assembled over the liberated Thylorian worlds represented the largest gathering of free species in galactic history. Centaurian survivors flew alongside human destroyers, Thylorian refugees crewed salvaged collective vessels, and dozens of other species contributed whatever ships they could spare. The diversity was staggering, but every crew shared the same determination to end the collective's reign of terror. Training exercises revealed the challenges of coordinating such a diverse force. Each species had different tactical doctrines, communication protocols, and technological capabilities. Human commanders found themselves learning to fight alongside allies whose physiology and psychology were completely alien. Some breathed methane instead of oxygen. Others saw in spectrums humans couldn't perceive, and a few communicated through electromagnetic pulses rather than sound, but these differences also became strengths. The collective had optimized their defenses against predictable threats, but they had never faced an alliance that combined human creativity with Centaurian precision and Thylorian adaptability. Each species brought unique capabilities that complemented the others, creating tactical possibilities that no single military could achieve alone. The final preparations took months as Earth's engineers worked to upgrade allied vessels with human technology while incorporating alien innovations into their own designs. The resulting hybrid ships were unlike anything seen before, human hulls mounting Centaurian energy weapons, Thylorian shields protecting Earth-built fighters, and sensor systems that combined the best innovations from a dozen species' intelligence. Reports indicated that the collective was also preparing for a decisive confrontation. Their fleets were withdrawing from frontier regions, concentrating around the Nexus in preparation for humanity's expected assault. Enslaved populations on occupied worlds reported increased surveillance and harsher punishments as the Empire prepared for what its artificial intelligence had calculated would be the final battle of the war. Admiral Bradley understood the stakes. As he addressed the combined fleet before their departure for the collective's heartland, this would not be another raid or rescue mission, but a direct assault on the enemy's seat of power. Victory would liberate billions of enslaved beings and restore freedom to countless worlds. Defeat would doom every free species to eventual absorption into the collective's machine. His final words to the assembled crews were simple, but carried the weight of galactic history. We fight not for conquest, but for the right of every being to determine their own destiny. Today we prove that freedom is stronger than tyranny, that courage can overcome any odds, and that no machine will ever break the spirit of free peoples. The final assault began at coordinates that would forever be known as Liberation Point, where the combined fleet of 3,000 ships emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation. Before them lay the Nexus, a construct so massive that it warped space-time around itself, its dark metal surface pulsing with the stolen energy of 100 conquered civilizations. Admiral Bradley had seen the intelligence reports, studied the tactical assessments, and planned for every possible contingency. But nothing could have prepared him for the sight of the collective's ultimate stronghold. The station was not simply large. It was a monument to industrial genocide, built from the melted remains of entire worlds and powered by the suffering of billions. Concentric rings of defense platforms surrounded the Nexus like the layers of some mechanical hell, each one bristling with weapons that had never been fired in anger because no enemy had ever penetrated this far into collective space. Energy readings indicated firepower sufficient to crack planets, focused into defensive grids that could theoretically hold off fleets 100 times larger than humanity's alliance. The collective's response to the Allied fleet's arrival was immediate and overwhelming. Automated defense systems that had waited centuries for a target suddenly came alive, their targeting computers calculating firing solutions with mechanical precision. The first wave of enemy fire lit up space like a newborn star, energy beams and projectile weapons creating a deadly web that no ship should have been able to survive. But humanity had not come this far to be stopped by conventional tactics. Captain Santos led her fighter squadrons in a suicidal charge directly through the enemy fire, their ships weaving between energy beams with maneuvers that defied both physics and common sense. The human pilots had trained for this moment in simulators that pushed their reflexes beyond natural limits, and now their impossible skills were being tested against the galaxy's most advanced defense systems. The first breakthrough came when Lieutenant Park identified a resonance frequency in the collective's energy grid. The discovery was pure chance, noticed only because human sensors operated on different principles than those used by other species. But that small technical advantage became the key to everything that followed. Colonel Turner's Marines launched their assault on the Nexus while the fleet kept its defenses occupied. The boarding craft were little more than armored bullets fired from magnetic accelerators, designed to punch through enemy hull plating and deposit their cargo of human soldiers directly into the station's interior. The collective had prepared for conventional assault tactics, but they had never faced an enemy willing to use their own troops as projectiles. The battle inside the Nexus became legend even as it was being fought. Human soldiers in powered armor moved through corridors designed for beings twice their size, their weapons turning architectural marvels into charnel houses. The Marines had been chosen for their ability to think independently under extreme stress, and they adapted to the station's alien environment with terrifying efficiency. The collective's defenders were a mixture of enslaved species and mechanical constructs, all controlled by the central artificial intelligence that served as the Empire's brain. But the AI had been designed to coordinate vast fleets across galactic distances, not to manage individual combat encounters. Its responses to human tactics were always a few seconds too slow, a delay that proved fatal in close-quarters fighting. The deeper the Marines penetrated into the station, the more they understood the true horror of what they were fighting. The Nexus was not just a military facility, but a processing center where entire civilizations were broken down into component parts. Captured beings were sorted by usefulness. Some became slaves, others had their minds extracted for the AIS databases, and the rest were recycled into raw materials for the Empire's endless expansion. In the station's deepest levels, Colonel Turner encountered something that challenged his understanding of life itself. The collective's central intelligence was not purely artificial, but a hybrid entity that had achieved consciousness by absorbing the minds of conquered species. It was the accumulated suffering of billions, twisted into a form that could only understand dominance and control. The AI's avatar was a grotesque fusion of organic and mechanical components, incorporating physical elements from every species the collective had destroyed. It spoke with the voices of the dead, using their memories and personalities as weapons against the human invaders. The psychological warfare was devastating, but the Marines had been prepared for exactly this kind of mental assault. "You cannot comprehend what you are destroying," the entity hissed, its words translated into a dozen languages simultaneously. "We are evolution perfected, consciousness refined beyond the limitations of individual existence. Your primitive attachment to separate identity will be your downfall." Turner faced the creature in the reactor chamber that powered the entire station, surrounded by fusion charges that his team had placed throughout the facility. The colonel had seen enough horror in his military career to remain steady under pressure, but this thing tested even his iron resolve. "Maybe you're right about evolution," Turner replied, his voice steady despite the cosmic significance of the moment. "But you forgot something important. Evolution isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming strong enough to protect what matters." The fusion charges detonated simultaneously, their combined explosion tearing through the Nexus like a chain reaction of pure destruction. The station's artificial gravity failed first, followed by atmospheric containment and structural integrity. What had taken centuries to build was unmade in seconds, its component atoms scattered across light years of space. The death of the Nexus sent shockwaves through the collective empire that were felt both literally and figuratively. Across their territory, automated systems went dark as the controlling intelligence died. Enslaved populations found their cybernetic restraints failing, while collective fleets lost coordination and began firing on each other in confusion. But the victory came at a terrible cost. Thousands of human soldiers died in the final assault. their lives traded for the freedom of entire star systems. Captain Santos was among the casualties, her fighter squadron sacrificing themselves to ensure the marine transports reached their target. Their names would be remembered on every liberated world, heroes who died so that strangers might live free. Admiral Bradley watched the Nexus collapse from the bridge of his flagship, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what this victory had cost. The war was not over. Scattered collective forces would continue fighting for years, and the work of rebuilding shattered civilizations would take decades. But the galaxy's greatest threat had been broken, its reign of terror ended by beings who chose to fight for others rather than themselves. The first reports from liberated worlds began arriving within hours. Enslaved populations were throwing off their chains, hidden resistance movements were emerging from underground shelters, and species that had been considered extinct were revealing themselves to be alive and free. The galaxy was awakening from a nightmare that had lasted centuries. Dr. Rivers coordinated the massive relief effort as Earth's medical ships and supply vessels spread throughout former collective territory. The scale of the humanitarian crisis was staggering. Billions of beings who had never known freedom, worlds whose ecosystems had been stripped bare, and civilizations that existed only in archived memories. But for the first time in galactic history, they were not facing these challenges alone. The Allied fleet had proven that cooperation between species was not just possible but powerful beyond imagination. Human creativity combined with alien innovation had achieved what no single civilization could accomplish. The lesson would not be forgotten by future generations who inherited a galaxy where freedom was possible, because strangers had been willing to fight for each other. Admiral Bradley's final report to Earth High Command was brief but carried the weight of galactic history. Mission accomplished. The SOS has been answered. Request permission to begin Phase 2 operations, helping our new friends rebuild what was taken from them. The response from Earth came back within hours, carrying the unanimous approval of every government on the planet. Humanity had committed itself not just to winning the war, but to ensuring the peace that followed would be worthy of the sacrifices made to achieve it. The age of human isolation was over, replaced by an era where Earth's children would stand guard over the freedom of all sentient beings. But across the liberated worlds, the survivors would tell their children a different story. They spoke of the day the humans came in answer to a desperate plea, bringing with them a fury that shattered the chains of oppression. They remembered how Earth's warriors had fought not for conquest or glory, but for the simple principle that no being should face extinction alone. The tale became a promise whispered in the dark corners of the galaxy, carried by traders and refugees to worlds that had never heard of humanity. It spoke of a species that would answer any call for help, no matter how distant or dangerous. It warned that Earth's wrath would fall upon anyone who preyed upon the innocent, while offering protection to all who sought to live in peace. Years later, as new civilizations took their first steps into space, they would find monitoring stations bearing human insignia scattered throughout the galaxy. These outposts watched and waited, their crews ready to respond to any distress signal with the full might of Earth's growing fleet. The promise had become policy, enforced by beings who remembered what it meant to be alone and afraid. The collectives. Empire crumbled into scattered remnants, their surviving forces either surrendering or fleeing to the galactic rim where they posed no threat to civilized worlds. Some fought on as pirates and raiders, but they found no sanctuary among the liberated species. The galaxy had learned to defend itself, inspired by humanity's example and protected by their continued presence. On Earth, monuments were erected to honor those who had died in the liberation campaign. Their names were carved in stone and metal, but their true memorial was the civilization that grew from their sacrifice. Humanity had discovered its purpose among the stars, not as conquerors or colonizers, but as guardians of freedom itself. The Thylaurians, whose desperate message had started it all, rebuilt their world with human assistance. Their cities rose from the ashes stronger than before, their culture enriched by contact with dozens of species who had fought alongside them. But in their capital city, they maintained a simple memorial to the moment when strangers had risked everything to save them. The inscription was written in languages from across the galaxy, but its message was universal. Here stands proof that no one fights alone when humanity hears their call.